Hello, everyone. Welcome to Educational Norm. Today we have a very special guest from the West Coast, which I thought I was talking to somebody from the East Coast. So this works out really, really nicely for her because it's actually still fairly early in her day. But this is Erin Bailey. She is the Vice President of Literacy Programs and Research for RIF. Reading is fundamental. I have to say that going back to my youth, those commercials came on every Saturday morning, and I watched those, and I always wondered what RIF was. And now I'm here talking to somebody that's in the industry and letting me know what's going on and letting the rest of the world know what's going on. So thank you for joining me today, Erin.
Thank you, Norm. And we hear that all the time whenever we're out in the community. I remember Riff. I saw your commercials when I was growing up, or I remember the bookmobile. So many, many, many people have these sort of nostalgic memories of reading is fundamental.
Yes, it's a fond memory. It's sort of tied into the same time with Hooked on Phonics. So there was all this reading and phonics going on back in the 70s and 80s that became very popular. And I'm glad I caught you at this time. Full disclosure, my niece works for RIF, and that's how I got to meet Erin. Um, so we actually hooked up at the right time because this is a big anniversary for RIF. Am I correct?
Yes, we are celebrating this year. 2026 is our 60th anniversary. Reading is Fundamental was founded in 1966. So this year means that we are the oldest literacy nonprofit in the United States.
Wow. And do you have anything special going on with this anniversary?
We do. So if anyone wants to get involved, you can go to riff.org/60. You can check out our video that recaps where Riff has traveled over the past 60 years. And then there's three main ways that you can celebrate with us on the website. You can donate, of course, help put the books in hands of children across the country. Celebrate us on social media by creating a post about your memory with Riff or something that you love about reading, and we will showcase that on a inspiration wall. Or you can share with us your unique story, your reading inspiration. And yeah, those are the three ways you can get involved.
Well, I'm gonna try something new on my podcast. I'm gonna share my screen with you because I want you to see a commercial and I want you to react to the commercial that I found to share with you.
Child who doesn't read, the world goes drifting, dropping back, dropping out. That's why a nationwide organization named RIF, Reading is Fundamental, was formed to help get books into the hands of children who had no books of their own. A book a child can pick out itself for keeps. A book that really belongs to him and makes him want to read. It works. There are more than 150 local RIT programs starting up in communities like yours. They're proving that once you start a child reading, there's no stopping. If America is to grow up thinking, reading is fundamental. To find out how you can help, write to RIF Incorporated, Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C.
That
Wow.
that
Well,
that was 1973, so it had already been around for a while. So, what's your first reaction to seeing that old commercial? Because that's way before your time, I'm assuming.
yes, it is. I think we should bring that back to celebrate our 60th anniversary. It's interesting, I mentioned the bookmobiles earlier, and that was present in that video there. That's changed. We don't have bookmobiles that go out into the community anymore, but really the heart of Riff has remained the same over the past 60 years. So something that you noticed in the video, the little boy is going to select a book. There's no one guiding him on which book to choose. That is still very much at the heart of Riff is choice. And then to take home a book and own it, to start your home library, to show you that you deserve a book because you are important and reading is important and you'll go places with reading.
There were a few commercials I was debating between, and I like this one because based on what I know about your organization currently, it hasn't changed. Like you said, everything is still about getting books in the hands of kids and letting them choose their own book. I love that he ended up on a fire hydrant reading the book, in a very horrible neighborhood. You could tell the neighborhood was designed to be bad. And they mentioned in that commercial there was 150 locations around America. What's the number now? How many different places are you involved with?
So we're currently in all 50 states. The number of program sites that we have, of course, fluctuates from year to year, but to date, from 1966 to now, we have reached 237 million children and distributed 430 million books.
Wow, that's amazing. And what great work you do. I do believe that in your philosophy of getting that book in the kids' hands, and when you see the joy that the children have picking out their books, that really does tug on your heartstrings. It's so important to them. So I love what you're doing. And I thought I'd throw that commercial at you because there was one with Ed Asner that felt very staged, and I thought, I'm not going to show that one. I'm going to show this one because that talks about why it was developed in the first place and how it has morphed over time. In talking with you, you can see that. It's awesome. The other piece before we get into the meat of our conversation, you also have a podcast, and I see it here in the corner. Reading Inspires. I got sent the Reading Inspires podcast where you were talking about your 60th anniversary, so I was able to enjoy that. So tell me a little bit about your podcast and what you focus on with your podcast.
Yeah. So also to celebrate our 60th anniversary, Reading is Fundamental launched our own podcast, Reading Inspires. I'm the host of the podcast, and it really is what it sounds like. Reading inspires. Every week we have new episodes. We feature guests who are literacy scholars, family members, community organizations, librarians, passionate educators, really anyone who champions literacy. And that's our audience as well. So you'll notice some of the episodes are geared more towards educators. Those are guests that we invited from our webinar series. They hosted webinars for us, and then they became guests for the podcast. So those are more academic focused guests, but we're also expanding to include children's book authors, community support professionals, people who are in the community working with librarians, working with children, getting books into the hands of children. And we'll see where it goes from there.
I love podcasts. They just are so there's such a niche area where you can find anything on anything and listen to it in a podcast. And to have this kind of range in a podcast that you're offering really does tie everything together really well for anybody interested in this reading idea and literacy across all generations, all economic levels, everything there is out there. So I appreciate you sharing that. And it comes out weekly, which is a big ask. I mean, that's a lot of work. You must be busy constantly doing research on your guests and things that are coming up. It's a lot of work.
Exactly. Yes. Recruiting guests. I do, as I mentioned earlier, I have a marketing team who supports with that, but especially guests who are going to come on and promote a book that they have. I do take the time to read the book, to prepare the questions, get to know the background of the guest. And it's honestly been a dream. I'm a literacy nerd myself, so I have the best job of all because I get to sit around and talk to people about reading every day.
That's great. So that actually is a great segue into what our main part of the discussion is obviously RIV as an organization, but also how does it fit into all these educational things that are going on, especially with the science of reading that's being pushed. It's really being pushed here in Ohio. I'm not sure how much is being pushed in other states. I do know that there's a lot of discussion around it, but science of reading is something that comes up all the time and something I'm asked to train a lot of people on. So I wanted to see how what you do aligns with the science of reading, but also what you offer to help support teachers and children and families in that regard.
Yeah. So RIF is very supportive of the science of reading, and I'll just give a basic definition, working definition, if you will. Science of reading is the large body of research that has evolved over decades. So it's cumulative, starting back to as early as the 60s, all the decades of research that has been done on reading. In the 90s, the National Reading Panel came together and identified 5 key areas of reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So Reading is fundamental. We have a platform called Literacy Central. It's a free open ed resource platform where we have support materials covering all of those areas. So you can look for graphic organizers that support comprehension or vocabulary development. If you're teaching a specific phonics pattern with your students, we have games to support that. So you might have a curriculum that's teaching you how to teach your students the short A sound. Well, we have great resources to support that, to really make it fun. We have like a Go Fish game, sort of Connect Four game, Sink the Ship, which is our version of Battleship. So one thing that I want to mention is that Riff is centered around joy. And hopefully you saw that in the video that you shared with the boy's
Hmm.
face lighting up when he got to select a book. So whatever the latest research is around reading, we believe that it's the joy of reading that really drives reading engagement, outcomes, and becoming a lifelong reader. So I kind of described it earlier actually as two sides of the same coin. So there's the what and how of reading instruction, but then there's the why. And that's, a child finding their purpose in reading is really what's going to carry them to be a lifelong learner. So we have support materials for all of that. The other thing that I always like to highlight whenever I'm talking about science of reading is that, I name those 5 areas that the National Reading Panel identified. Then other people use Scarborough's rope, which came out
Hmm.
in around 2001, that breaks up reading into word decoding and language comprehension. Those are very popular models. But what's kind of missing from both of these models is reading motivation. And there actually is a lot of research around reading motivation. So we try to draw from that research as well and contribute to that research.
Could you go in deeper? Because that's one of the areas that, especially post-pandemic, that I'm hearing a lot of teachers ask about is how do I get my students engaged? They seem to be disengaged. They seem to be somewhere else. They don't see the value. What is some of that research saying about reading motivation?
So we at Riff describe reading motivation as choice, which we touched on earlier, access, and engagement. So choice meaning that students have choice in the books that they select. And they have opportunities to read those books, choices during the school day and outside of school. Access is what it sounds like, having access to books. As you mentioned in that video that we looked at earlier, we call those book deserts. There's areas across the country where you've heard of food deserts, but similar concept of book desert. There's very few books for children, not just to own, but even a library, a comic book store, a bookstore. In fact, in Anacostia, which is right outside of DC, where RIF is headquartered, there's been research to show that there's as little as one book for every 833 children.
Oh
Um,
my.
in that community. So book deserts prohibit access to books. So that's where RIF comes in, trying to build home libraries so children have access to books. And then the third piece is engagement, which is really where you can see motivation kind of come together. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not just that you know how to read, it's that you want to read, you see a purpose for reading, you view yourself as a reader.
I love that. And it ties in well with a lot of the educational training that I work on with teachers about providing options for kids for reading that required reading. Yes, you have to read a book, but they usually force a book on them that either they love it or they hate it. There's usually no in between. And immediately the engagement's gone and there's no reason for them to read it other than I have to. So the voice and choice that students have in the classroom can be taken up in that same regard where you're not going to get engagement without them having a say in what's being read. So I'm glad you shared that because that is an overlooked area that I really appreciate, especially post pandemic. I think it was always there, but now it's just reared its head even more, just because of how schools have been set up and what kids are used to. So you mentioned a lot. You have Literacy Central, which I looked at and I love it. I'm sharing it with everybody that I talk with. Um, but specifically for elementary school kids, when you're covering those 5 areas, um, what will Literacy Central help for an individual? A lot of them were the games that you mentioned, but also you had a lot of teacher tools in there. How could a family use that to be more interactive with their child?
Yeah, so I would say about 80% of Literacy Central users are educators. The other 20%, families, volunteers, other people's working with children. So my team is very intentional in designing the resources so that they are family and volunteer friendly. You don't have to necessarily be an educator or, speak the education lingo to be able to understand the resources. For every book that we highlight on Literacy Central, we also have a family guide. So there's also science around read alouds, the importance of read alouds. They help build vocabulary, comprehension, language skills. For family members, they're also an essential part of bonding with your child. So if you look up a book on Literacy Central, let's use one of my favorites, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, you will find an educator guide. So this is a way that a teacher may use the book in the classroom, but then there's also a family guide to go with the book. As often as we can, we also have those family guides translated into multiple languages for families to use at home. And the key to that is you don't have to have the book to use the family guide. So I'll say it again, you don't have to have the book to use the family guide. They're written in a way that, let's say my child read Hungry Caterpillar at school that day, and I'm at home and I'm a Spanish speaking family, I can take that guide and talk to my child about the book or do an extension activity at home, a low to no resource craft or a fun activity to continue to bring that book to life for my child, get to know what my child's learning at school and build on their literacy skills at home. And it's nice to have the book, of course, but you don't have to use these guides. They're written in such a way that you can have a conversation about the book if the child read the book in class or if they have the book at home.
That I think that's a very critical piece because there's so many school districts that can't afford to send the books home because they may have just a classroom set and now they're stuck going home trying to explain everything. And if you have it so they don't need the book and they can have great conversations about it and build on it, that is an amazing feature to have in your Literacy Central piece.
Have a lot of nursery rhymes. Those are great for rhyming, which is a key skill in phonological awareness. We just launched our early childhood digital hub on Literacy Central. So there you can get more resources that are catered to ages 3, 4, 5, early childhood type of ages.
So the next piece that I want to talk about is I'm getting a lot of calls recently for middle school and high school literature and teaching of reading because obviously if there's a struggling reader that's in middle school and high school, they're going to have a rough time, and the research shows this, finding a job that they really want to do, and it makes them less marketable if they don't read well. What does Riff have to offer for our secondary, fifth grade up type students?
So this is also exciting for us because we launched our middle school family literacy initiative it's in its fourth year. So we launched it 4 years ago. And this is really geared towards adolescent readers. We started with a very child focused approach. We went into middle schools. We did focus groups with middle schoolers to find out what are you interested in? What kind of books are you reading? We then curated a 12-month calendar based on kind of two levels of choices, if you will. So, first, we came up with topics that middle schoolers were interested in. So, things like funny. Now, normally we call that humor as a genre, right? But we wanted to also use the language that the middle schoolers were using. So, they said funny. Um, they said friendship drama or relationship drama. So I think we ended up calling that one relationships, which makes a lot of sense, right? You're an adolescent, you're navigating friendships and other kinds of relationships, and you want to read about characters that might be going through something similar to you so you can get ideas of how to navigate that. Horror was a big one. Mystery, specifically murder mystery, emphasis on the murder is what these young people were saying. But we really took this into consideration and then we sat down and listened to them. And it was enlightening to hear middle schoolers in their own words say things to us like, I'd really like to see more LGBTQ representation in your books. I'd like to see disability representation. I really like reading graphic novels. So we made changes over time to the books that we were able to offer through this program based directly on the feedback that the students were giving us. So I mentioned the two levels. So we had these different topics that we came up with. And then for each month, we had a theme. This is what's useful for teachers. So let's say um, August, the theme is courage. This is a big theme that you may see in literature, that you may see across books. So if an educator, a literature, ELA or literature teacher wants to teach about the theme of courage, we then have 10 different books with different topics. So we have a mystery book that emphasizes courage. We have a humor book that emphasizes courage. That way, there's choice for the student. So a teacher can still teach that theme and hit on the teaching points that they're trying to make, but students can feel like they have choice in the books that they want to read. Now, the other thing that we found that was fascinating in the study that we did with this program is that middle schoolers actually opened up the genres that they were interested in reading when their friends were reading it. So we heard them say things like, I don't usually like mystery books, but my friends were reading this, so I picked it out so that I could read it together. And we know that adolescents learn through social interactions. They're very social in nature, so it makes a lot of sense. Students were open to trying new things when their friends were doing it, and they could interact with their friends through that way.
They want to be unique, but they want to fit in. So that's a perfect
Yeah.
way of doing it. Um, I love that. And I didn't know that was part of what you were offering, but I love the idea of the theme in the month and then they can pick what genre they're going to pick from. That relates to something that I use called book clubs, which that's not a unique term, but the kids get to pick their book. You have all those 10 books laid out in those different genres, and they pick their book that they want to read. And then that group, whoever has the same book, they're together and they decide time frames and how long should it take to do this and that. And they develop their own schedule and how they're going to prove that they understand it and it's sinking in on their own schedule as a group decision. So it's not the teacher doing it, it's the kids making those choices to make it work for them, which is fitting in perfect with what you're doing at Riff. I have a lot of questions based on what you told me though. So I have to go back. Um, in the research that you were able to conduct, how big was the difference between boys engagement and girls engagement in reading? Did you see a difference?
That's a great question. No, there was no statistically significant difference between boys and girls in this program.
Wow, that surprises me. Usually boys have been very reluctant, and I haven't seen it as much lately, but that's something that's good to know. Another question that I had is how many different graphic novels do our students have access to through your program? Because it seems to me like a lot of teachers try to not do graphic novels. They feel it's not a great piece of literature, but kids absolutely love them. So how do you balance that in what you do?
So it's very interesting topic that I happily engage in debating about all the time. We offer around 10 or 12. I want to say there's about one per month in the middle school program because they're very popular. And I recognize someone pointed out to me before, graphic novel is not a genre, it's a medium, which understandable. But, so you can have a mystery through a graphic novel, you can
Hmm.
have a memoir through a graphic novel. But if that's the medium that you enjoy, I'm happy to count it as a top. That's why we called it topic, instead of genre. But it's interesting to me when teachers don't want to engage in graphic novels because there's a lot of rich teaching to happen there. First of all, a lot of times in graphic novels, the vocabulary is actually more sophisticated than in a typical novel. And the reason being because there are pictures to support your understanding. There's also a balancing act that happens when you're reading comics or graphic literature. It's the juxtaposition of the image and the text and where your eyes go and the way you're interpreting things and the direction. There's an intended direction. There's frames and that you read, but whether you focus on the image first or the text first, that's kind of a unique reader experience that
Mhm.
you take on as a reader. Also a lot that goes into thoughtfulness around color, how big the size of the frames. I'm sure you've read one before where one page, the frame takes up the entire page.
Mhm.
Another page, there's several frames on the same page and spacing in between them. Um, Inner dialogue of a character versus exterior dialogue, which is usually represented through like a thought bubble or a speech bubble. Captions versus words that go with it. I mean, I could go on and on, but this is very complex literature, and lots of different directions that you can take teaching with it.
One of my favorite graphic novels is Nat Turner. It's a great historical rendition of Nat Turner's story. And I used to teach eighth grade history and I loved it, but I don't even know if I could use that because it is very sophisticated. And I'm not sure that the art would be acceptable in today's day and age because it's graphic. It has that kind of piece to it. It really is a great book. I also think I'm trying to push I'm working with a couple companies trying to push them to do graphic textbooks. If they're going to sell textbooks, let's make them more interactive for kids and something they want to read. Now, the last question I had based on what you told me, one of the issues that I've seen is that many, especially high schools, not so much middle schools, but they're trending that way, where they use authors that have been dead for over 100 years, and they're using, that classical literature. I notice obviously you have that wide range. Was there anything in your research that shows that kind of engagement level changes depending on when it was written and who it was written by?
So we did not study that specifically, but it's certainly interesting. What we did in this program was we tried to include a balance of books that we knew teachers were already teaching, with newer books, certainly to provide choice there. I think one interesting thing that I haven't studied, but I am interested in is when children, students hate books, as you described earlier, because you can learn a lot and have a very passionate discussion and write a lot when you hate the book. And it's actually when you find what I would call in the middle, a blah book, where you're not engaged. So, and I've had this debate with many people about the book, To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a classic. I won't share my leaning on it, but depending on whether that's a love it or hate it book right there. So should we stop teaching it? Probably not, because for decades it's inspired debates, critical thinking. So I think my answer there is like a yes and we can teach these classical or canon literature pieces, however you want to talk about it, sprinkled in with more modern, relevant text to students' lives today.
That's a great answer. I like the banned book list because it gives me a reading list that I know is going to create controversy with anybody that shares it with me. It just creates that natural tension that I'm looking for. And I think that they're doing us a service sometimes when they say, "Oh, these books should be banned." Great. That's my reading list. Let's start there. Uh, so with all this going on, I love your knowledge of literacy and the teaching of it and what this means to kids. What's next with Riff? What's coming down the road? What are some changes, growth things that you're trying to do? What are you looking to do at Riff next?
One thing that I haven't highlighted yet, but certainly there were lots of places that I could, was ebooks. So, looking back at that video that you shared, choice was a part of it, physical books, but we are in the future now. And ebooks are everywhere and they increase access. So, as part of our 60th anniversary, we also launched 100 free ebooks on our ebook platform, Skybrary, which I can share the link with you, or you can go to skybrary.org. That means, this is for every platform. So whether you have a tablet, a phone, a smartphone, a computer, you can have access to 100 picture books that you can read anytime, anywhere. It also has an offline feature. So, I mean, think about that. We wanted to end book deserts. We essentially have, as long as you have a device that you can use in your home, you can have access to 100 ebooks. And what I'm excited about is the research that's going to go with this. So we've already seen some early studies showing that if you treat an ebook the same as a print book, like a parent and child reading together, asking their child questions while they're reading, making connections with the characters, pointing out interesting vocabularies. As long as you're following those same things that we know work with print books, you can make an ebook be just as effective as a print book for building literacy skills.
The ebook is something that schools again don't do very often, which sort of surprising, knowing we have all that technology in the schools. But it's great to see that we have another way of getting books in kids' hands. Are there publishing companies that are also in that same mode where we're just trying to get books in people's hands?
So one thing that I can share with you now is that the 60th year has been really big for RIF in addition to relaunching Skyberry accessible on all platforms. We also acquired August House Publishing. So RIF now has a publishing arm. And the
Oh,
reason
wow.
why we did that is, to your point, to get more books in the hands of kids, these cherished stories. So August House specializes in folklore and oral storytelling, stories that have been passed down for generation and generation. And as the nation's oldest literacy nonprofit, we took that into our hands of stewarding these amazing stories that we want to continue to spread to children across the country for even more decades and decades to come.
I love that. As a former history teacher, I'm always looking for those original stories, the primary sources and those things that are often overlooked in teaching. So that would be perfect for a lot of the historical aspects and the storytelling in and of itself is amazing. But those things in the classroom will definitely hit home with a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So I just have two more questions. One is if I am a school district, and it doesn't matter, income level or anything of that matter, how can I get more involved with RIF as a school?
So you can always visit riff.org to find out more about our program offerings. We also have open our matching grant application. So every year we have a competitive matching grant that schools and districts or community organizations can apply for, where you essentially double your money. So let's say that you have a PTA or other funding that you fundraised and you apply for the matching grant, RIF will double your contributions. You can either get twice as many books in the hands of your students or however you wanted to use that program. Always want to promote the matching grant to schools who are looking to get resources from RIF. I also highly encourage you to check out Literacy Central, where you can find all the free resources for educators and families. We also have a webinar series that you can participate in to learn more from our guests and experts. And then, of course, subscribe to Reading Inspires podcast.
Those are great. You answered my second question. I was going to ask about how could an individual teacher do, but you did that as well. It's like you read my mind. It was perfect. So you are doing some amazing things, especially here on your 60th anniversary, but the work you've been doing over the last 60 years truly is commendable. I, like I said, that commercial just takes me back to my youth, and it was something that it's been around forever. And I think some people at times forget that you're still around because you don't advertise as much as you used to. And all that goes back into, getting the books in the kids' hands. So I love what you're doing. The podcast, what's upcoming on the podcast? What do you have your future guests ready to go?
We sure do. So coming up in February and March, as you know, March is National Reading Month. So we have a guest that I think you'll be interested in after our conversation today. We have Shannon Live, who's going to talk about building writing through comic books with students. We also have Dr. Katie Sherba, who's going to talk about relevance, another key topic that we talked about. So relevance in building your reading identity. Dr. Elena Forzani is going to talk about assessments which I think is very timely because we're going to be coming up on assessment season
Hmm.
here. Um, and then today, I actually, right before we recorded this, I sat down with Hannah Schneewind and Dr. Jennifer Scoggin, who talked to me about trusting readers, about building independent reading in the classroom. Also going to be bringing on Dan Yacarino, excuse me, who's the author of the Luna Sisters, which I've been reading, which is also written like a comic slash graphic storytelling. So very on theme here.
We just try to be consistent. I sort of knew what was going on, right? So that's why we did it. It's a good talk. I, Erin, I cannot thank you enough for all your expertise and your time today. You really have a wealth of knowledge, and I'm happy that we're able to spread the word of what RIF is still doing after all these decades of work, and how we can all be involved with getting more books in kids' hands. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Norm. I enjoyed talking to you.
Same here. And for our audience, as always, be kind, be professional, and find solutions. And I'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you.